Welcome to 13 Cents More, the podcast. I am E. Probilski, an author, editor, and book publisher. I have done all these different things for many years, and I am here to share book publishing insights, personal anecdotes, information about my books, and so much more. Let's get into it. As a note, if you hear my voice doesn't sound great or I'm breathing a little louder this week, I'm sorry. My allergies are absolutely monstrous right now, and there's only so much I can do about it, so please bear with me. This week's episode is because I received an email where somebody tried to scam me, and it really frustrated me, so I decided that this week I was going to be talking about scammers. Being an author is hard. You know it, I know it. It's not a mystery about the business. Selling our books, getting everything edited, getting cover art, all of that stuff is a challenge, and it can be expensive and time-consuming and intimidating if you're not really familiar with the process. And even if you do have experience with the process, it can be a lot. So the fact that there are scammers running around in our waters is infuriating. There are so many of them, and it never fails to piss me off whenever I see either an author talking about how they fell for one, or one of them attempts to get my attention, because it makes me, it makes me so mad. It makes me inarticulately mad. You hear that? I'm so mad I can't talk straight. I had one approach me this week, and he had the gall to be very self-important about the fact that I told him off and got mad that I wasn't polite to him, but frankly, the guy can just go jump off a bridge. And that inspired this week's article because I want to talk about these people and how to identify them to try and protect other authors from the experience of getting scammed. Obviously, I didn't give this person any money because I knew he was a problem the minute I saw him, but I really did want to use this experience to warn other people about the realities of this situation. Also, like I say down below in the post, if you think this is about you, it's not. I'm talking about actual scammers, and anybody who, if you know me, if we talk, I don't think you're that person because I don't associate with people who are that person. So please don't think that this is going to be about you. It isn't, I promise. So let's start off by talking about the kinds of scammers that are out there, and there are a ton of them. But there are a few specific genres of scammer that show up over and over again. The first one I want to talk about is the most common that I've seen, and those are quote-unquote marketers. We're going to talk about the people that constantly DM us on social media, try and sound interested about our book, only to immediately start asking hey, how do you sell your book on Amazon? And then they will try and solicit you to pay them for quote-unquote marketing services or quote-unquote reviews or so on. All of these things. It is so common, and the worst place I have found for that is Instagram, but it does happen on other platforms as well. I have actually had to turn on content moderation on Instagram and leave it on perpetually because of the number of scammers who are constantly messaging me on there. It's so bad. I almost can't use the platform as a result. It's really frustrating because I know Instagram is one of those platforms authors should be on, and with the uncertain future of TikTok, Instagram's the place to be, but it's a real problem for me. A lot of these people are also just sending messages from dummy accounts. It'll be hey, promote this on whatever it is, Writer's Warmth or whatever the new one is right now. I have that particular phrase blocked so I don't get those messages. But if somebody wheedles into your messages being hey, you wrote an awesome book, and so on and so forth, and then they start asking where to buy it, well, they're complimenting the book without having read it. And it's obviously a cold open to try and engage you to talk to them because they are trying to stroke your ego, and then they're going to try and offer you things, even though they have no idea what your book is. Because whenever I ask these people, what do you know about my book? They can't answer because they don't know anything. I'm assuming even most of them are bots. They aren't even human beings most of the time. Now, this isn't me saying that everybody who DMs you a compliment about your book is a liar. There are fans, but they will be able to tell you specific things about your book that they enjoyed. So it'll be things oh, I loved when the character did this, or what have you. It'll be more specific, but if somebody just DMs you blanket praise without specifics, that's one of the red flags. But we're going to get into red flags later. The next kind I'm going to talk about here are quote-unquote editors. This one really I take personally because I am an editor and this is my job. So when people pretend to be an editor, it really just gets under my skin. There are a lot of people out there also who aren't necessarily scammers, but think they have the qualifications to edit and don't. Those also really drive me crazy because people already undervalue my profession, and then the people who fake being an editor or think they can edit because they caught a typo on somebody's Facebook account once is absolute garbage. I want to be clear here that I'm not talking about newbies who are just learning. Like, they're not scammers. You might want to be careful with them, but you're also going to get what you pay for a lot of the time. That said, I'm not going to talk down about them because everybody starts somewhere. That is just how things are. There are also a lot of people who will attempt to pass themselves off as editors while not being particularly proficient in the language. There are also people who will try and pass themselves off as editors who don't have a deeply proficient grasp on a language. This most often that I've seen, it happens in English, but I'm sure it happens in other languages. But if you can't speak the language proficiently and don't have an understanding of the culture and the idioms and all of that stuff, you absolutely should not be attempting to edit anything in that language. So if this person is not a native speaker, you'll want to vet them extra hard because they need to be capable of using that language with the same skill as a native speaker in order to edit in that language. And that goes for anybody. Like, I speak a little French, and I would never consider editing in French at all, despite being familiar with the language, because I am not familiar enough with it in order to make sure that it sounds correct. It would sound like an American speaking French, not a French person speaking French, or a Canadian speaking French, or any of the other countries and cultures who use that language. So that is a thing to watch out for. The next group I want to talk about are quote-unquote cover designers. This, another one, makes me real mad because these folks oftentimes will have websites with designs they didn't make, or they rely entirely on AI-generated images, and the covers aren't good quality. A lot of the time, also, people like that will use unlicensed images and fonts in their covers, which can result in chaos for authors. A good cover designer will have a distinctive style to their covers that you can identify, and their website will look relatively cohesive. They might be different covers, but a lot of the time they specialize in a certain genre and so on. You can ask questions about things like trim size, DPI, image and font licensing, and they will be able to prove to you they have those fonts and those images licensed, which you might need. If you don't vet these things carefully, you could end up in serious trouble, because Amazon does not screw around when it comes to things like shutting down accounts using unlicensed images. Because if you are selling a book that does not have a licensed image, you will cause chaos, and they could end up in trouble. So they don't want to get sued for that, and thusly they shut you down and delete your account. So you don't want to deal with that headache. Make sure you vet your cover designers carefully. The last one on this list that I'm going to cover is quote-unquote formatters. If your book formatter is just somebody running your book through Atticus or Vellum and saying they're your formatter, find a new formatter, because somebody who knows how to typeset or format books properly will understand leading, kerning, tracking, fonts, all kinds of other stuff. They will ask you about your trim size. They will ask you about margins. They can point to licenses for their fonts if they're using licensed fonts. Most of mine are open fonts, but they will usually work in InDesign or Affinity Publisher or something of that level. They aren't going to work in Atticus or Vellum. Book formatting is way more complicated than just setting the paper size to 5.5 by 8.5 in Word and calling it good. There's a lot of nuance to that. So if you're going to be hiring a formatter, you have to absolutely make sure that they know their stuff. I have seen horrors of people whose books just got ruined by quote-unquote formatters they found on Fiverr, who they put their dialogue completely separate from everything else and like re-edited things and messed all things up. Like, it's atrocious. I have a friend of mine who's working on somebody's book who got fleeced by somebody like that. And my heart goes out to them, but you have to be so careful when you hire a formatter. Again, you want samples of work, you want proof. So that's another arena you can end up in trouble. So now that we've identified these different kinds of scammers, I'm going to talk about how to recognize when a scammer is approaching you. You're going to want to be able to be like, no, that doesn't smell right. So I've got a list of things here that you should probably look for. Now, one red flag on this list doesn't necessarily mean the person's a scammer, so be careful. But if your gut says something, listen to it. So here's the list of things that you should look for. Somebody is probably a scammer if they approach you unsolicited. If they don't have sufficient website or social media presence and doesn't pass the sniff test if they have one, they don't have a client list that they can show you. Now, there are some professions that don't really allow for client lists, like ghostwriting. They aren't going to be able to show you a client list legally because they can't, but you can get a feel for whether or not they know their stuff. Next, you have the attempt to hard sell you a service that you didn't ask for or need. So if somebody just messages you out of the blue and says, hey, I want to market your book, that is not a legitimate marketer. Legitimate marketers they have websites and you go to them. They don't go to you unless you solicit that kind of thing. And even then, usually you go to them and people will just say, hey, go talk to this person. Next up, they will ask you to pay for things that you don't usually pay for. Things like reviews that you post to Amazon and Goodreads. You can't pay for Amazon reviews according to their terms of service. That will get your account shut down. So that's a real problem. Then you have folks who are charging a very low rate for a service that is typically kind of expensive. Like I've seen people charge $200 flat rate for editing, quote unquote, for any word count. Things like that are dangerous, and those are usually shysters. They may well be using AI and just feeding your book into ChatGPT. Don't trust it. If the rate seems too good to be true, it probably is. These things are not cheap, and there's a reason for that. Next up, if they promise a certain number of followers or guaranteed sales if you purchase their services, those are typically scams because a good marketer will know that they can't guarantee a specific number of people will follow you or a specific number of people will buy your book. You also want to look out for folks who are going to attempt to force you to make a decision now and be like, oh, well, this offer is only good for another 10 minutes or whatever it is. That kind of thing happens. If they try and force you into feeling urgent about it, don't do it. It's not good. You want to have somebody who's like, yeah, take a look at my contract. Show your lawyer, show your friends. I don't really care. See what you think about it. Then get back to me. Because most of the editors and people of legitimacy I know, I would rather have somebody vet the heck out of me. I don't want to pressure somebody into making a sale because that's not right. It's not how we work. It's not our industry. Finally, if the person you're trying to hire can't tell you where their education came from or what study they have had in the sphere they're in, that's a red flag. Some of us, like me, come from the school of hard knocks, where I can prove how I learned what I know. I've been editing for 16 years, but I didn't go to school for it. I learned it in the trenches, so to speak. So that is definitely a thing, but you do want to ask somebody, like, where did you learn this? Like, what are you doing? Where is your education from? Like, what have you done to further yourself too? Or are you part of any professional organizations? Not all of these different spheres have professional organizations, but some of us do. As I said at the beginning of this isn't a comprehensive list of every red flag out there, but it should give you a really solid basis to start with to identify some of these problems. And as I said a couple times through this, if it seems too good to be true, it is. And if your gut isn't sure about a thing, take some time, listen to it. There's probably a reason for that. Self-publishing has created this entire species of scammer out there attempting to steal money from authors. And most of us are not exactly rich most of the time. So I want to make sure that where you put your money is going to be something safe for you. Also, as a final note here, I am going to be gone for another week after this, so I'm not going to be around to answer things as I normally am. So if you don't hear from me this week, don't feel bad. I am actually on vacation. So I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you when I come back.